My wife cheated on me with a colleague while I was on a business trip, but when I arrived, I've never been one to post about my personal life on the internet, but here I am, hoping for some advice. My name's Ethan, I'm 34, and my wife, Sarah, is 32. We've been married for 8 years now, and up until recently, I thought we were doing pretty well. We have 2 kids, a boy who's 6 and a girl who's 4. I work a lot, but I've always tried to make time for my family. I travel for business quite a bit, but we've managed to make it work. Or so I thought. The first sign something was off happened about 3 months ago. I was getting ready for a week-long business trip, and Sarah seemed more distant than usual. We've had our ups and downs like any couple, but this time was different. She'd been going out with her friends more often, coming home late, and well, things in the bedroom had cooled off. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone goes through rough patches. But then I started noticing little things. She would always be on her phone, texting someone, but when I asked, she'd brush it off like it was nothing. Just a friend from work, she'd say. But something about the way she'd smile at her screen bothered me. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband, though, so I pushed it to the back of my mind, but the feeling lingered. Then came the business trip. I left for the trip on a Sunday evening. As usual, Sarah kissed me goodbye, but this time it felt mechanical. I brushed it off, telling myself I was overthinking. After all, we'd been married for years. Maybe the spark just fades a little after a while. She told me to drive safe, and I headed out. The first couple of days were normal. Work was busy, which helped keep my mind off things. I'd call home each night to talk to Sarah and the kids. But even during those calls, something felt off. She'd seem distracted, like she was only half listening, giving me one-word answers. When I asked her what was wrong, she just said she was tired or had a lot on her plate with the kids. Again, I let it slide, but on the third night, something strange happened. I called Sarah, but she didn't pick up. No big deal. Maybe she was putting the kids to bed. I figured I'd try again later. But then an hour passed, and still nothing. I sent a text asking if everything was okay. Another hour went by. Still no response. Now, Sarah always has her phone with her. Always. So when 3 hours passed with no word from her, I started getting that sinking feeling in my gut. Something wasn't right. That's when I decided to do something I'd never done before. I logged into our shared phone account to check her activity. I wasn't proud of myself for doing it, but I had this gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. I logged into our phone account, something we both had access to, but I'd never bothered to check before. It showed all the call and text logs, including numbers I didn't recognize. That's when I saw it. A number she'd been texting back and forth with almost nonstop for the past few days. I hadn't even noticed until now, but the timing lined up perfectly with the times I couldn't reach her. Even on nights when she said she was out with friends, she'd been messaging the same number. I tried to stay calm. Maybe it was someone from work. Maybe I was just being paranoid, but it didn't feel like that. I couldn't help myself. I called the number. It rang twice before a man picked up. Hello. His voice was casual, like he wasn't expecting anything unusual. I froze. I didn't know what to say, so I hung up immediately. My heart was pounding in my chest, and my mind was racing. Who was this guy? Why had Sarah been texting him so much? And why the hell hadn't she told me about him? That night, I barely slept. I kept telling myself that it was nothing, that I was overreacting. But deep down, I knew something was wrong. The thought of Sarah betraying me was too much to process, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. The next morning, I woke up exhausted and still rattled by the events of the previous night. I tried to focus on my meetings, but my mind kept drifting back to that phone call and the sound of that man's voice. I couldn't get it out of my head. Was I losing my mind, or was there something more going on? By lunchtime, I couldn't take it anymore. I texted Sarah, asking her how her night went. I waited, staring at my phone, but it took her almost an hour to respond. It was fine, Just hung out at home after putting the kids to bed. That didn't sit right with me. I knew she wasn't telling the whole truth. I debated whether to confront her now or wait until I got back, but the idea of stewing in my suspicions for the rest of the trip was unbearable. So I texted back, "Who's that guy you've been texting lately?" This time, her response came almost immediately. "What are you talking about?" I typed, "The one you've been texting nonstop. I saw the logs, Sarah. Who is he?" A few minutes passed, and then her answer came. "He's just a friend from work. You're being paranoid." My stomach churned. There it was, my worst fear wrapped up in a lie. I knew something wasn't right, but her dismissal, calling me paranoid, made it clear she was trying to downplay it. Her response wasn't one of someone with nothing to hide. Still, I couldn't bring myself to push harder, not yet. Instead, I replied with a simple, "Okay." But deep down, I knew I couldn't just let this go. After that exchange, I tried to carry on with my work, but I couldn't shake the uneasiness settling in the pit of my stomach. Sarah's answer wasn't enough. Just a friend from work wasn't going to cut it, not with the way she had been acting. I knew I couldn't confront her over the phone and expect the truth. No, I needed more. That evening, after my meetings, I went back to the hotel room and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone. I debated whether I should call her again, try to get more out of her, or just wait until I got home. But the thought of being in the dark for another few days was eating away at me. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I decided to look through her social media. Sarah wasn't big on posting, but she did use Facebook and Instagram to stay in touch with friends. I scrolled through her posts, looking for anything that stood out. That's when I noticed a photo she had been tagged in the night before. It wasn't on her account, but one of her friends had posted it. It was a group shot from a bar, a casual night out. Except Sarah wasn't just casually sitting there. She was standing next to a guy I didn't recognize, laughing with her arm draped over his shoulder. He looked a little too comfortable, leaning in, his hand low on her waist. And there was no mention of this night out when I asked how her evening went. I zoomed in on the photo, staring at the guy. Could this be the same man she'd been texting? I knew I had to find out. I clicked on his profile. His name was Ryan, and his face matched the voice I heard when I called that number. My blood ran cold. My hands were trembling as I stared at Ryan's profile. There he was, the guy my wife had been texting nonstop, the one in that photo with her, looking way too cozy for my comfort. His profile wasn't private, and after a bit of scrolling, I found several pictures of him and Sarah at different events. Work gatherings, it seemed, nothing too incriminating. But the more I looked, the more I saw a pattern. Sarah had never mentioned any of these events to me. She hadn't been staying in like she said. I felt the walls closing in on me as I pieced together the lies she'd been feeding me. All those nights out with friends, the late texts, and now this. My heart was pounding as anger started bubbling up. I couldn't believe she thought she could keep this hidden from me. I wasn't ready to confront her directly yet. I needed more. I had to know exactly what was going on. That night, I installed a phone tracking app. I hated myself for doing it, but I needed the truth. I needed to know if she was lying about where she was or who she was with. The app allowed me to see her location in real time and would notify me if she left home or went anywhere suspicious. I knew it was a step too far, but I was desperate. Sure enough, an hour later, I got a notification. Sarah had left the house. I opened the app to see where she was going, and my heart sank when I saw the address. It wasn't anywhere near her usual spots or her friends' places. Instead, she was heading to some apartment across town. My mind raced, but I knew there was only one explanation. She wasn't just out with friends. I sat there in my hotel room, staring at the blinking dot on the map, my mind swirling with anger, confusion, and disbelief. The betrayal was real. I had the proof I needed. The rest of that night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, my mind racing, trying to decide what to do next. Part of me wanted to call Sarah right then and there, but another part of me felt paralyzed. How do you confront someone about this? How do you even begin to have that conversation? My emotions were all over the place. Hurt, anger, sadness, betrayal. The next morning, I couldn't focus on work at all. My phone was glued to my hand as I tracked Sarah's movements. She stayed home most of the day, but by late afternoon, I saw her heading out again. This time, I decided to call her while she was on the move. She picked up after a couple of rings, her voice sounding casual, like nothing was wrong. "Hey, babe, how's your trip going?" I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's fine. What are you up to?" "Oh, just running some errands with the kids," she said, her tone light, almost cheerful. I checked the app again. She wasn't anywhere near the kids' school or grocery store. She was heading right back to that apartment from last night. My chest tightened. I couldn't keep pretending. "Sarah, where are you really going?" There was a pause on her end, just long enough to make my heart pound. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice suddenly more guarded. "I know you're not running errands. I can see where you are," I said, my words coming out sharper than I intended. She stammered for a moment. "Ethan, what are you talking about? Are you tracking me or something?" I didn't even try to deny it. "Yeah, I am. And I know you've been going to that same apartment. Whose place is it?" There was silence, and I could practically hear her brain scrambling for an excuse. But I wasn't going to let her lie her way out of this. Not this time. Sarah's silence on the other end of the line stretched on for what felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, and I could feel the anger rising inside me. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "It's just a friend's place, Ethan. You're overreacting." I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "A friend's place? You've been there twice now, late at night. You didn't mention this friend before, and you've been lying about where you're going." She paused again, and I could hear her scrambling to come up with something. "It's nothing, really. I didn't want to worry you because it's a guy from work, but we're just friends. That's all." I swear. The weight of her words hit me hard. "A guy from work, and you're hanging out at his place? You expect me to believe that after all the lying?" Her tone shifted, becoming defensive. "You don't trust me? I can't believe you're spying on me like this. This is crazy, Ethan, but I wasn't buying it. Trust? You're the one sneaking around and lying about where you've been. How am I supposed to trust you?" She went quiet again, but this time it felt like she knew the jig was up. I could feel the truth inching closer, but she was still holding back, clinging to whatever excuse she thought would keep the peace. "I told you, it's just a friend. You're making a big deal out of nothing," she said, her voice softer now, almost pleading. I didn't want to hear it anymore. "Sarah, I called the number you've been texting. I know who he is. I saw the pictures of you with him at that bar. Don't treat me like an idiot." Her breath hitched, and for a moment, I thought she was going to admit it, come clean about everything. But instead, she just muttered, "I need to go." And with that, she hung up, leaving me staring at my phone, fists clenched, knowing this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I stared at the screen for a while after she hung up, a mix of disbelief and fury washing over me. I couldn't believe how easily she tried to lie, to dodge, as if everything could just go back to normal. But I wasn't going to let this go, not anymore. The rest of the day dragged on. I couldn't focus on work, couldn't think straight. All I could do was replay the conversation in my head, wondering how long this had been going on and why she thought she could get away with it. But I knew one thing for sure. I had to confront her face to face. My trip was supposed to last another 2 days, but I couldn't wait. I rescheduled my flight for the next morning and didn't tell Sarah I was coming home early. I wanted to catch her off guard, to see if she'd be with him again. Maybe, deep down, I wanted to see her reaction, to force her to look me in the eye when I asked her the truth. That night, I barely slept. My mind was racing with what I'd say, how she'd respond. Would she finally admit it, or would she keep lying until there was no way out? The next morning, I boarded the plane, a knot tightening in my chest. I kept checking my phone, watching her location on the tracking app, half expecting her to head back to that apartment. But she stayed at home with the kids, as if nothing was wrong. I landed around noon, my hands sweating as I grabbed my bag and made my way out of the airport. The whole drive home, my mind was a blur of anger, sadness, and dread. What was I walking into? When I pulled up to the house, everything looked normal. The kids were at school, and Sarah's car was in the driveway. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves as I walked up to the door and unlocked it. I found her in the kitchen, casually making lunch. She looked up, surprised to see me. "Ethan, you're home early." I stood there, staring at her, trying to read her expression. Was she nervous, scared, or just caught off guard? "I think we need to talk," I said, my voice low but firm. Sarah froze for a moment, her hand hovering over the counter, and I could see her eyes darting as she tried to figure out how much I knew and what to say. She set the knife down, wiping her hands on a dish towel as she turned to face me. "About what?" she asked, her voice a little too calm. I stepped further into the kitchen, feeling the weight of everything I'd discovered pressing down on me. "You know what? About Ryan." Her face twitched, just for a second, before she caught herself. "Ryan? He's a friend from work. I told you that." I shook my head, my anger bubbling up again. "A friend? You've been lying to me, Sarah. Sneaking around, going to his place while I'm gone. You think I wouldn't figure it out." She opened her mouth to protest, but I kept going. "I saw the text, Sarah. I saw the photos of you two at that bar, and I tracked your phone. I know you've been at his apartment the past 2 nights. Stop lying to me." The room fell silent for a moment. Sarah's face went pale, and I could see the panic setting in. Her eyes darted around the room, like she was looking for an escape. Then she finally spoke, her voice shaky. "It's not what you think, Ethan. I swear. I've known Ryan for years. We work together all the time. And yes, we've hung out after work, but it's not." She stopped herself, probably realizing how ridiculous it sounded. I took a step closer, my voice hard. "You're seriously going to stand here and lie to my face? After all of this?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and for a split second, I thought maybe she'd finally admitted that she'd come clean. But instead, she just whispered, "I'm sorry." "Sorry for what?" I snapped. For lying? For cheating? Or for getting caught? She didn't answer. She just stood there, looking down at the floor, silent. The rage, the hurt, it all hit me at once. "How long?" I asked, my voice breaking. "How long has this been going on?" She wiped her eyes, still refusing to meet my gaze. "A few months." That was it. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Months. This wasn't some one-time mistake. She had been lying to me, betraying me for months, while I was out working to provide for our family. The room felt suffocating, like the walls were closing in on me. Months. I repeated, more to myself than to her. It was hard to process. How could she have been sneaking around for that long, smiling at me, acting like everything was fine? She finally met my eyes, her face streaked with tears. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I felt my fist clench, but I forced myself to stay calm. "You didn't mean for it to happen? You've been lying to me for months, Sarah. This wasn't a mistake. You made a choice, over and over again." She collapsed into a chair at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. I know I messed up. I didn't know how to stop it. I stood there, staring at her, feeling like I didn't even know who she was anymore. "So, what? You've just been sneaking around with Ryan this whole time, while I'm out working, thinking we're okay?" "It wasn't like that," she said, her voice muffled by her hands. "It started as just hanging out after work. I didn't think it would go this far. I didn't mean for it to." "Stop saying that," I snapped, cutting her off. "You did mean for it. You didn't stop it. You kept lying. And now what? You thought I'd never find out." She didn't respond, just shook her head, tears still streaming down her face. I felt no sympathy. Maybe before, when I had suspicions, I could have been open to an explanation, to working things out. But this was too much. Do the kids know anything about this? I asked, my voice colder than I intended. She looked up quickly, shaking her head. No, of course not. I would never let them find out. Good, I said, my voice firm, because you're going to keep this away from them. Whatever happens between us, they don't deserve to be dragged into this mess you made. She winced at my words but didn't argue. It was like she had nothing left to defend herself with. No more lies to spin. I'll be staying at a hotel for a few days, I said quietly. We'll talk about what happens next when I'm ready. But right now, I can't even look at you. Her sobs grew louder as I turned to leave, but I didn't stop. I walked out the door, slamming it behind me, feeling a mix of rage, sadness, and relief. I drove aimlessly for a while after leaving the house, my mind swirling with everything that had just happened. I couldn't go back, not yet. I needed space, time to think. I checked into a hotel, threw my bag on the bed, and sat in the silence, staring at the walls. It felt unreal, like I was living someone else's life. I had been blindsided by the person I trusted most in the world. How do you even begin to process something like that? The more I thought about it, the more it hit me just how deep the betrayal went. Months. That word echoed in my head, gnawing at me. I couldn't stay still, so I pulled out my phone and texted a close friend, Jake. He'd been through a rough breakup a couple of years ago, though nothing like this. I figured he'd know what to say, or at least he'd listen. Hey man, you around? I need to talk. I sent. Jake called almost immediately. Ethan, what's going on? His voice was calm, but concerned. I think my marriage is over, I said, my voice cracking for the first time since I'd left the house. I filled him in on everything. The lies, the affair, how long it had been going on. I could barely get the words out without my throat tightening up. Jake was quiet for a moment before responding. Man, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. That's brutal. Yeah, I muttered, rubbing my temples. I don't know what to do. I left the house. I'm at a hotel. I just can't be near her right now. Take your time, Jake said, his voice steady. You don't have to make any big decisions yet. Just breathe, man. You've got to figure out what's right for you. But whatever you do, don't make any rash moves. I know, I said, though my emotions were tugging me in 100 directions. But how do I even look at her again after this? Jake didn't have an answer for that. I wish I had the magic fix, but I don't. You just need to sit with it for a bit, you know? Sort through the anger before you make any moves. We talked for a while longer, but it didn't make the pain go away. When the call ended, I felt just as lost as before. I spent the rest of the night lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering how my life had come to this. The next morning, I woke up with a dull ache in my chest. I had barely slept, and my mind was still racing with thoughts of Sarah, the affair, and the mess that lay ahead. But one thing kept pulling at me. The kids. How was I going to explain this to them? They didn't deserve any of this. I hadn't called home yet. I didn't want to talk to Sarah, but I also didn't want to leave my kids in the dark. So I decided to send a quick text to check in. Hey, how are the kids doing? Sarah responded almost immediately. They're fine. Asking about you, though. When are you coming home? I stared at the message, my stomach turning. The thought of going back, facing her, pretending like things were okay. I wasn't ready for that, but I also couldn't avoid my children. I'll come by after they're home from school, I replied, keeping it brief. When I pulled up to the house later that afternoon, my hands were shaking. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew one thing. I had to keep things together for my kids. They didn't need to see me falling apart. I walked in the door, and the kids came running. Daddy. My daughter's little arms wrapped around my legs, and my son followed, grinning from ear to ear. It was the first time I'd felt something close to happiness since this whole nightmare started. I scooped them up, trying to keep my voice steady. "Hey, guys, I missed you." Sarah was in the kitchen, watching us, but I didn't acknowledge her. Not yet. I focused on the kids, asking them about their day, helping them with their homework. For a couple of hours, I managed to push the anger and betrayal aside. It was just me and them, and for a moment, things felt almost normal. But Sarah was hovering. I could feel her watching me, like she wanted to talk but didn't know how to start. Eventually, after the kids went upstairs to play, she made her move. "Ethan," she said softly, stepping into the living room. "Can we talk?" I didn't want to. I wasn't ready to have this conversation again, but I also knew we couldn't avoid it forever. So I nodded and sat down on the couch, keeping my distance. She sat across from me, wringing her hands. "I know I've hurt you. I just don't know how to fix this." I looked at her, feeling the weight of her words, but also the weight of all the lies. "I don't think you can fix it, Sarah." She flinched but didn't argue. "I want to try. I'll do anything, Ethan. I'll cut him off completely. Change jobs if I have to. I don't want to lose you." Her desperation hit me, but it wasn't enough. Not after everything. "I need space," I said, my voice cold. "I'm not ready to forgive you, and I don't know if I ever will." The room fell silent. She was crying again, but this time, I didn't feel sorry for her. I felt numb. The only thing that mattered to me right now was making sure our kids didn't get dragged into this disaster. "I'm staying at the hotel for now," I added. "We'll figure out what to tell the kids later." The days after that conversation blurred together. I stayed at the hotel, kept my distance from Sarah, and only went home to see the kids. It was like living two separate lives. One where I was still their dad, trying to keep things as normal as possible, and another where my marriage was crumbling right in front of me. Sarah texted me often, asking how I was, begging me to talk, saying she'd do whatever it took to make things right. But every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, I felt nothing but resentment. She wanted to fix things now, after months of lies, of sneaking around with Ryan. And for what? What had she been hoping to get out of it? A week passed before I decided I needed to start thinking about the future. We couldn't go on like this forever. Me in a hotel, her in the house, the kids in the dark. Something had to give. I called a lawyer. It felt surreal to even consider divorce after 8 years of marriage. We had built a life together, a family. And now I was sitting in a lawyer's office, talking about splitting it all apart. But the lawyer was calm, professional, and asked the right questions about the kids, the house, our finances. It wasn't emotional for him, just business. But for me, it was gut-wrenching. When I left the lawyer's office, I sat in my car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. How had it come to this? Part of me still couldn't believe it. How quickly everything had fallen apart. But another part of me, the part that kept remembering her lies, knew this was the only way forward. I couldn't live with someone I didn't trust. And no matter how much she cried or begged, that trust was shattered. That evening, I went home to see the kids again. I walked through the front door, and for the first time, Sarah wasn't in the kitchen waiting for me. She had been giving me space, I guess. But the house felt emptier without her hovering. After tucking the kids in, I stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at our family photos on the walls. We looked so happy. I couldn't reconcile those smiles with the reality of where we were now. Sarah appeared at the bottom of the stairs, her eyes red and tired. "Ethan, can we talk, please?" I sighed, knowing we couldn't avoid this conversation forever. "I went to see a lawyer," I said, my voice flat. Her face crumbled, and she took a step back, like the words had physically hit her. "A lawyer," she whispered. You're really going to do this?" "I don't see any other way," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I can't forgive what you did, Sarah, and I can't live like this." She sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I never wanted this. I don't even know why I don't know what I was thinking. Well, you made your choice, I said coldly, and now we have to deal with it. Sarah sat there in the chair, her body shaking with sobs. But I had no more sympathy left for her. I'd run through every emotion, anger, sadness, confusion, and now I was just numb to her apologies, numb to her tears. I sat down across from her, needing to make things clear. Look, Sarah, I started, keeping my voice even. I'm not doing this to hurt you, but I can't move past this. You betrayed me, you lied to me, and you put our entire family at risk. How am I supposed to trust you again? She lifted her head, tears streaking down her face. I know, Ethan. I know I've ruined everything, but I don't want to lose you. I don't want to lose our family. I shook my head slowly. You already have, Sarah. You made that choice when you let this go on for months. I gave you everything, and you threw it away. I can't pretend like nothing happened. She didn't say anything for a long time, just sat there, staring at the floor. Finally, she whispered, "What about the kids?" That was the one thing I couldn't figure out. The kids. They didn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this. I didn't want them to lose their family, but I couldn't stay in this marriage just for their sake. We'll figure it out, I said softly. We'll tell them together. We'll make it as easy on them as possible. Sarah wiped her eyes and nodded, though she looked like she was crumbling inside. You really want a divorce? I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of those words. Divorce. It sounded so final, so harsh, but there was no other way. Yeah, I said quietly. I do. The room fell into a heavy silence, and for the first time since this whole thing started, it felt real. There was no going back now. We were done. The marriage we had spent years building was over. After a few more moments, I stood up. I'm going back to the hotel. I'll come back tomorrow, and we can figure out the details. She didn't say anything as I grabbed my keys and headed for the door. But just as I reached the front hallway, I turned around. I'm sorry it came to this, Sarah, but I can't keep living like this. She looked at me, her eyes hollow. I'm sorry, too. And with that, I walked out the door, feeling both a sense of finality and a strange relief. This was it. My marriage was over, and it wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I'd made the right decision. I deserved better. As I drove away, the weight of everything that had happened over the past week settled in, but for the first time in a long while, I felt like I could breathe again. I didn't know what the future would hold, but at least I wasn't living a lie anymore.